Just turning back to the summit, it was very interesting to hear Kaja Kallas, the sort of senior EU diplomat, at the end of last week saying, well, actually, President Putin got all that he could ever have dreamed of from that summit. He didn't want sanctions. He hasn't got sanctions. He's welcome back onto the world stage. You get a big pat on the back from Trump. And his maximalist claims for a peace deal or he didn't want a ceasefire, and Trump's now agreed with him. No, we won't have a ceasefire. We'll have a peace deal. And his peace deal has not changed since the day that he started the war on the 24th of February, 2022. So actually, we're in a hell of a position. I think the other thing to really concern, we haven't heard from Trump for a week. After that meeting 10 days ago, he said, right, Zelensky and Putin will meet, now, sort of any day. Now, what we're hearing out of the Kremlin, certainly from Sergei Lavrov, the rather eccentric foreign minister, is that there is no chance of peace. We need to have loads of other meetings to discuss detail. So pushing it all into the long grass. When it comes to what Europe can do, I mean, it seems pretty clear that, and certainly I think Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, US defense secretary, and Trump have all also confirmed there will be no US boots on the ground in Ukraine. And that's fair enough. What is essential is that the Americans provide a sort of backstop, which they say they will do, even saying that they will do a sort of Article 5 backstop for Ukraine, although they appear to road back on that a little bit. But as long as American air power and American intelligence is still available, then Europe needs to come up with the boots on the ground. And absolutely, I mean, I've written about this in some detail. A lot of work, we understand, has been done, and Admiral Radican, the Chief of Defence Staff for the UK, was in the US last week, tying up the details with other European military leaders on this. The size of the force it's difficult to say exactly, but we're probably talking about 40,000 sort of combat troops in Ukraine that could then deploy very quickly to plug any gaps, or if there is any transgressions. And when it comes to air power, actually NATO European countries, especially now that Finland and Sweden are part of it, really do have enough air power. There are a lot of F-35 jets in European countries, fourth, fifth generation stealth jets that vastly overmatch anything Russia has. So, I am pretty confident that actually Europe can come up with the combat hardware, the boots on the ground and the boots in the air, if you like, to police any sort of ceasefire, and also the naval capability, because no doubt the Black Sea will become a very important area. What people have to remember is it's all very well putting a force of, say, 40,000 on the ground. Actually, you need a force 3 times the size to maintain it, because you're always going to have a force that's training, ready to go, and then you'll have a force that's just left. So for 40,000 troops on the ground, you need 120,000, which seems a lot. But between the UK, the Germans, and the French in particular, plus the Nordic countries, then certainly we are more than capable of doing it. And the professionalism of the army and the kit, again, is far superior to anything that Russia has. But we still need the US backstop. The final piece on this, Louis, is we're unlikely to see any of the Baltic states. I mean, Lithuania in particular is building a 30-mile defensive border with Belarus. They're very concerned the Russians might try and come through there. And of course, Lithuania has Kaliningrad, the Russian enclave, sort of behind it. And there's a concern that the Russians will try and link up there. So we probably won't see any Baltic states, but within the others, there are plenty of forces. And of course, whatever criticisms we might have of President Trump, he has made Europe look up and realize that it needs to spend a heck of a lot of money to provide a credible conventional deterrence, so that if Putin is stopped where he is discouraged from going any further in future, which is a huge concern. And I share Christopher Steele, who used to be the MI6 security service lead on Russia, saying any pause will allow Russia to rebuild. and we must be wary of that. The way to stop it is to have such a strong conventional force in Europe that he won't come up, because when he looked west on the 24th of February 2022, we were asleep. We were not paying attention.
And you mentioned the possibility of US air power as well. That's something that Trump himself seemed open to last week. What is it that the US will be doing as a backstop, seeing as it is something they're now more on board with? I mean, is it just a matter of European troops slotting into that chain of command that we assume is there in Kiev with American assistance for the Ukrainians, or would it be a new system that led this, or something more like a NATO chain of command?
Well, I think there will be various options looked at. I expect what would be required is the NATO chain of command. In other words, we have a peace enforcement force of NATO troops who the majority will probably be in Ukraine somewhere, but they will ready to move if there is an incursion by the Russians across, the line of demarcation, the demilitarized zone, or whatever they're going to call it. The sort of option that actually they fit in to support the Ukrainians is a sort of step further, which in effect would actually bring NATO directly into conflict with Russia. So with a peace enforcement force, the troops are there to deter mainly, and actually if they don't deter them, they've probably failed. But really, if there is any seepage, then the force would push that back. This is defensive. The option to become offensive and directly supporting the Ukrainians, is really, I would have thought, the last resort if Russia keeps on fighting. So I think the former, it'll be a NATO chain of command. We talk about the American backstop. We're talking about the massive American air power that they have available, and a lot of it is based in Europe, so they don't need to forward base it. And it's it's an insurance policy. Even given all Putin's bravado and the bravado of his close supporters like Lavrov and Peskov and Medvedev, they know that the US Air Force is, the Russian Air Force is no match for the US Air Force, and they would be obliterated if they went up against them. And of course, Trump demonstrated that with the attack on Iran, a few months ago, destroying a lot of its nuclear facilities, which were protected by Russian air defense and Russian fighter jets that didn't even put a scratch on the Americans. So, those are the two options, I think, and hopefully it will be just a peace enforcement force that the Russians will look at and say, right, okay, we'll stop there. We won't test them.
And it's becoming, it seems to be becoming increasingly more likely that there will eventually be European troops on Ukrainian soil, Western forces on Ukrainian soil. What does that mean that we're sort of moving in that direction for Russia's overall objectives and reason for starting this conflict?
Well, again, it's a really tricky place to get to. And of course, this weekend, again, we've heard out of the Kremlin saying that NATO troops would be unacceptable in Ukraine. It's part of their unachievable for Ukraine aims for a peace deal. The peace deal is they want the whole of the Donbass, a whole bunch of other areas in Kherson and Kharkiv and Zaporizhia, no NATO troops in Ukraine, no prospect of Ukraine joining NATO or the European Union, and a reduction of Ukraine's army. I mean, virtually nothing in there is any way close to what Zelensky has said he will agree to, or the Ukrainian people will agree to. So it is almost inevitable that NATO troops are going to have to go on the ground in Ukraine, I expect, to protect it. But we're hoping in a peace enforcement role rather than actually an offensive role to support Ukraine, because that would be a very different prospect. But I think NATO really needs to, and I say in my piece today, we need to, in Europe, flex the one muscle that has resonance in the Kremlin, and that's our military muscle, because I believe we vastly overmatched the Russians. And when you just look at, Putin is talking about having the whole of the Donbass. Well, the MOD intelligence update are saying 4 years to do it and another 2 million casualties. It's just not going to happen. And I think we need to be bold. Unfortunately, till quite recently, a lot of European leaders have really been cowed and terrified by Putin. Even President Trump seemed to walk in his shadow in Alaska. But it is now time that the collective might of Europe needs to really stand up and be counted, and the Kremlin needs to understand that they will yield no further.
Yeah, and speaking about that wider European support, the stuff that is going on at the moment, Zelensky has said he wants to secure at least $1 billion on a monthly basis from allies to purchase US weapons. How much of a difference would it make if Ukraine can secure a more consistent flow of weapons at the moment?
Well, that is really important. We've seen too often where frontline units appear to have run out of ammunition or artillery shells, or can only fire one artillery shell for every 5 or 6 the Russians firing. That is not a way to conduct a war, and that's what we're talking about. So, the Ukrainians should have enough ammunition that they need, and it's clear at the moment they don't. It's clear they're getting through air defense missiles, in particular, at a devastating rate, and conversely, Russia is increasing its use of drones and missiles against civilian targets. So it is absolutely essential. And I expect in the sort of sophisticated long-range missiles like ATACMS, like the British Storm Shadow, the Taurus missiles, if Ukraine had a decent stock of them, they could make a huge difference. We talked about their strikes on the oil and fuel industry, but actually, if they could double or triple that, they could make a lot more progress. So the fact that they have to buy the stuff off the Americans, that seems to be the price of doing business with President Trump. But so be it. And one wouldn't have thought that $1 million or €1 million a month is beyond the capability of the European countries to provide. So let's hope that does happen, and the flow of weapons that Ukraine needs increases to a point where they can start sort of dominating the Russians rather than just sort of trying to survive.
And as we mentioned earlier, Ukraine are building a new missile of sorts, a cruise missile that they've named the Flamingo missile. But does Ukraine generally have the capacity to produce these missiles en masse domestically, do you think? And how challenging is that when you're under bombardment daily?
Well, I think we've all been really impressed by the innovation of the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian defense industry. I mean, they have produced some really, really stunning kit, and I think this Flamingo cruise missile is that. And Ukraine has always produced great engineers, and it is the Antonov aircraft industry is Ukrainian. Most of the Russian jets are in effect Ukrainian. So Ukraine has a real sort of history, and a lot of the tanks, the T-34 tank. A lot of the more modern tanks, T-80s, 90s, were designed and originally built in Ukraine. So, one of the reasons, of course, Putin is so keen to get Ukraine back, not just for its natural resources, particularly in the Donbass, but also its engineering capability. So, slightly long-winded answer to your question, I'm absolutely sure that Ukraine can produce these Flamingo missiles, in numbers. And it's probably a very sophisticated bit of kit. No doubt they've had some help from, technical help from the West as well. I think it's the fact that we're all talking about it, and the fact that Ukraine is making a big thing about it sort of leads me to believe that actually people think this is the real deal. And I expect, and also Ukraine's on a war economy. They are sort of turning plowshares into tanks, sort of thing, for want of a better vernacular. But when national survival is what you're facing, then quite frankly, you've got to do it. If it means making less luxury items, then so be it. So I expect A lot of industry is focused on this, and as I said, I'm very confident the Ukrainians are well up to the task.
You've been watching or listening to Frontline for Times Radio with me, Louis Sykes. For more on the war in Ukraine, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and sign up for a membership, or you can hear all the latest news and analysis on Times Radio or read it at thetimes.com. And remember, we are in both podcast and video form. You can find us on your favourite podcast platform. It's Times Radio's Frontline, or you can watch us on Times Radio's YouTube channel. Thanks very much. Goodbye.